Next up, hello, we have Elliot Trinidad, a fellow Blaseball developer.
Hi.
Hi. I'll do your spiel. So Elliot is a Los Angeles designer, writer, and multidisciplined production guy who loves flavorful systems, unpopular anime, and learning about new things. Most recently, a community designer on Blaseball, he co-managed the live game's highly active and highly creative online community from 2020 to 2023. And even more recently, Elliot ruined his Dwarf Fortress Citadel by getting too ambitious with lava.
Don't we all? Yeah. Thank you, Alexi. And it was, Alexi, somebody I work with on Blaseball, and it was a pleasure to do so. I'm here to talk about touching grass and taking names, tuning the Blaseball name generator, which is one of the larger projects that I took on during Blaseball. And yeah, let's get into it. As with a lot of proc gen stuff, it's in this case, my talk is going to be turning this thing, the big spreadsheet, all of the whatever data that you collect, and turning it into reaction and emotion, and like people enjoying the stuff that you put out and have forming like a connection to them, forming an actual like emotional bond with the things that come out, and like how do you get there? Let's go through it. Let's generate some names right now, actually. So I hooked this presentation up to one of the spreadsheets that has a bunch of name generation, and I thought one of the best ways to kind of demonstrate like the tone and tenor of the names that come out, the names that people are interacting with in Blaseball, is to just show you them, to show you the fruits of that labor. I haven't seen any of these before. I generated these right before the talk. So say hello to Drip Jaywalk and Midori George and Debbie Petrikov and Edith Marshall, Susan Turner, Toffee Avedano, Jamila Haruki, and Azaseo. I think these are cool characters I would like to get to know. Let's talk about what Blaseball is. I think a lot of people in this audience probably might have heard of Blaseball and are familiar with it, but if you're not, let's get some greater context as to how I've generated these names, what they're for. Blaseball was a browser-based game, started in 2020. It was very much a pandemic era project that started when real life sports were not able to, be in operation. And so it can just be described as an MMO sports simulator where you are fans watching games. You can watch live, fully simulated sports games in real time, log into a website, chat about them, have favorite teams, chat amongst other people watching the same games. So it's like you're playing the role of a fan who can mechanically change some of the rules of the game, but a lot of interaction is watching them having basically like having opinions about them in the way a sports fan does, right? Like having favorite league players whose careers you follow because they just seem interesting or because they keep popping up, or just having rivalries with other people playing the game. All the outcomes in Blaseball are basically a matter of chance. We are constantly surprised by what happens. None of the winners or outcomes or even like event triggers and skill triggers are not really pre-scripted. There's a chance outcome that'll happen, and we don't know when in the season they will happen, which is always a fun surprise to us. And also, I think heightens, as you'll see, like heightens how people get attached to these things because they all feel like a miracle, right? The league has hundreds of randomly generated Blaseball players. I'll refer to them both as characters and players because the word players gets confusing, when talking about games in general. And structurally, it's about 24 teams competing for a weekly championship. Importantly, it's all text and UI. There's no graphics. There's no depictions of the players in the league. There's no portrait profile things. So fans are fully encouraged to collaboratively imagine how these characters all look and sound and feel, pretty much just from going off of the text, off of their name, off of like a few facts about them, like their favorite coffee, and about like what they do in the game itself, right? What events trigger when they're on the field. And from that, so much creativity is sprung forth because anyone who's a fan of Blaseball can pick a favorite or just can watch this fictional character's career blossom into something unexpected and as you can imagine, make tons of art, make tons of fanfic, make tons of anything about that. And importantly, it's in an absurdist horror setting. So sometimes a hitter will be incinerated to death in the middle of the game, which is how you get new names generated, among other reasons. So with that context, I'll briefly run through what are the characteristics of names in Blaseball, like at least compared to give you a comparison to other games that also generate names. Everyone has a first name and last name. There are dozens of characters generated in close proximity. So, like, compared to an RPG that randomly generates NPC names, you might only have a few of those in a room. But in Blaseball, that's the entire game. All of these randomly generated characters are interacting with each other, right? None are more important than any other during generation. So there's no equivalent of like an elite enemy. There's no like boss class. There's no like saving cool sounding names or like high level sounding adjectives for a certain tier of generation. They just all go in the pot. And the tone of the writing of the game is, I guess you could describe as dry humor. It's funny, it's comedic, but it's about as comedic as like pro sports can be, which in real life there's people with goofy names, with goofy nicknames, and we want to channel that instead of trying to make it seem like the writing in the game is I don't know, try to make you laugh by being not serious about it. I could go on all day. This still has some slides that I meant to hide, but there's more that you can learn about Blaseball. I'll talk more about that here. Good job so far. Let's get some news guys in here. Who are these characters? There is Sadie Kwan, Wiz Zachariah, sign him Cold Snap, Diamond Cavani, and I wonder if this is an older. This might be an older slideshow, but I'm going to. Can I preview this for a second? Sorry for the delay, because I know I changed some things here that this might not be reflective. I think this works out. That's fine. We'll roll with it. Millions Francine, that's a good name. Sorry for the distraction. Let's keep going. We got names. So what is the name generator in Blaseball itself? What's it doing? And unfortunately, or fortunately, the answer is like not really that much. It's not complicated. It really does just pluck a random first name and a random last name and doesn't check for repeats, doesn't wait towards alliteration to sound better. There's a number of reasons for this. Chief among them is just that it's easier, is that our programmers were really busy with lots and lots of other stuff. So it allowed me and the rest of the community design team to, to work on that without having to interact with the coding on a pipeline level. And so I guess, this talk is really less about name generation, less about procedural generation, and more about thoughtful manual curation. I'm going to be talking about curation most of all, right? So let's talk about intentional curation. What are we curating towards? What are we trying to get across here? I'll add some context again about why we had to even overhaul these names, even look at them in a big picture. This would have been in late 2022. We were building up to a big kind of 1.0 relaunch in January. New engine, the world itself, the fiction of the game itself kind of has like a soft reboot in which we were encouraging more people to join in and have less to not need to know as much about pre-existing characters, right? So we have new characters, we have some returning characters, but not hundreds off the bat. And I also want to give a big shout out to my co-designer on this project, Alexandria Min Maximus, which is an amazing name, also known as Keeper Sins, who we worked on these names together. Importantly, because Blaseball had been running for a couple of years at this point, a lot of names at this point were actually user submissions. That was a Patreon perk, and it was great. It allowed a lot of audience buy-in. It allowed people to submit first names or last names to the field of eggs where Blaseball players come from, and it it served a really good purpose for a long time, but this is something that we were looking to shift away from at this point. It was a significant source of moderation labor, not just like moderating out, bad unsavory names, which is not really much of an issue, but moderating out just things like that are kind of borderline, things that are also just like copyright infringement, and the other downside is that it will drift the authorial tone of the game, because names are going to be how your world presents its fiction in so many ways that narrative does. And I'll get to that a bit more, because we're going to be talking about what are these goals that I set out to solve during this name generation kind of refresh project. And one is to establish a baseline for the just some guy name. What does that mean? This is something that was requested by the narrative team, because again, Blaseball had been running for a couple of years. We'd be at season 24 and beyond at that point. And on the right side, you can see there were a lot of names that had come from the kind of bombastic submissions that were user submitted, right? They're cool names. I like pulling up a game and seeing what Yusuf Fenestrate is up to, or what Cicero Gubbins and Cool Name Galvanic are gonna do today, right? But it also kind of created a situation where like they become samey. Like there's a lot of wacky names when they're all special. None of them are that special, and you kind of need the more plain names in that field to make the other ones shine, to feel special, instead of filling an entire team with 20 of them, right? So in addition to that, in addition to like leveling out this sort of baseline for what an average name in Blaseball should feel like, we also decided to retire names that already had some reputation. If you've followed Blaseball, there's like Parker is a character that people refer to on a first name basis, right? If there was another Parker that came up in the same season, that would be funny. That would be good coincidence. But if there's one that came up a year later, while the first Parker already has such a big, like when you hear that word, that something comes to mind. That's not. It's distracting. That character can't be their own person. So in the same way that you kind of like retire a jersey number, sort of. We wanted to make sure those old names wouldn't come back and then have a whole meme expectation about them, right? Because they sound similar. And like I mentioned, we wanted to set aside the user submitted name parts for a while. If Blaseball was running much longer, went on to run much longer, we would probably bring them back once we'd generated a lot of kind of manually curated names. But yeah, we wanted to start that new season fresh. So another thing that the narrative team really wanted to encourage was like more nobody characters, more like plain name characters getting the chance to rise in popularity just because of stuff that happened to them through the procedurally generated events of the game. It's like once there were a bunch of characters getting generated with very, very loud, very main character sounding names, that's cool. They would get a dedicated following like immediately, and they'd get people drawing art of them. But it's all random. You don't. Sometimes they just get benched and never do anything, right? On the flip side, you can have this whole arc from a character that doesn't sound like anything special. Mike Townsend is a really plain name, but in the history of Blaseball, they started out so plain that they were like hated on the Seattle garages because they were just such a crappy pitcher. So much that they became a meme, and then they wrote a song about them, and then over time, Mike Townsend became such a good player and became so central to a lot of world events in Blaseball that they're like this folk hero now, right? Like this totally plain, unassuming, unremarkable character had this arc with this really plain name, sort of because there was already this kind of like community narrative attraction to plucking out this like really plain guy and giving him a more interesting story. And also just by chance getting an interesting story. Should use some user submitted names. I talked about this a little bit. I think it's tough. There's a lot of pros and cons. It's great to get people in, but it is a lot of extra work, and it's worth knowing that when you do so, you invite people to kind of like submit really more bombastic names and to make their mark on that. So our second goal after that was to expand cultural diversity in the name pool. This was something that was led by the community team that I was a part of. And at this point, the earliest name pool, it did include some multicultural names from sports, but this project would have been the first audit of looking at the name generator as a whole, seeing the proportions of names that come from particular origins or are just like a silly word, right? And it was definitely lacking. We didn't through Blaseball running, we didn't put a lot of conscious effort into it just because there were so many plates to spin at the same time. I think this was felt too, right? Like this lacking was felt. Blaseball felt global both in the fiction and in the fan base, but the characters that it generated didn't. So I wanted to fix that. From a community perspective, I will say that online audiences, even when they are themselves diverse in gender and sexuality and geography, they will still default to a white American perspective. That's just how English-speaking fandoms often find themselves, talking about the things that they like. That's how discourse happens online. We did notice there's a desire from fans to have more opportunities to write and to illustrate person of color characters. And, we wanted to make sure that there were so many of those characters with like explicitly non-white names that they didn't have to resort to like the ones here and there being representative of an entire culture. Even though, and like, even if that's like not part of the game Blaseball, quote unquote, right? Like even if that doesn't engage with any of the mechanics of what you're doing in the website, that is such a large part of the community of how people interact with the game and the characters and how they kind of just form attachments to watching Blaseball, that like it was as important as anything else, right? It's a high priority for us on the community team and for the health of fandom. And we had found that, investing in an anti-racist fandom literally cultivates a higher quality audience, like putting the work and making sure this is a priority. It also gives you a community that sucks less, that is like less difficult to manage and less difficult to interact with. And that is all, that's all beyond the scope of, I think, this talk. But if you want to learn more, I have to shout out GDC talk given by community director Bria Davis that you can find on the GDC Vault. Check that out. We love talking about community management from Blaseball. So let's see. I can skip those with these a bit, but this kind of talks about like how I decided to just pick out where to start with in terms of having this global representation for names across the world, right? I can start with ones that were already have a connection to the world of sports, to baseball specifically, and then in learning and having in building up resources to that and having a pipeline to that and getting used to doing that research, moving on to ones that I wanted to also represent and just further my curiosity. And you can do the same. You're going to research a little bit and find more about what you don't know and what you want to add to your game to give it more life, more diversity. In the same way, this is more stuff. These are supposed to be skipped slides, but like you can research more about how foreign names are transcribed in English. They'll give you some interesting ideas. In particular, this one I wanted to get to, which is like, how do you actually source real names? It's just thorough research. You do a lot of searching. You do a lot of looking around as many sources as possible. But more importantly, the ones that you're unfamiliar with, when you're unfamiliar with language, you should cross-reference as many sources as possible. Just so you have a wide base of knowledge and you kind of make sure you're not missing things or getting misinformation. You can look up Egyptian names, for example, right? But you're going to get like a mommy blog about like how to name your son like a pharaoh. Whereas you can also just keep doing searches that reference census data or statistics, the self-polling statistics. That's still useful. They'll give you a pretty good basis to find out. In our case, what was important was like accuracy to real world names. And you could do that thorough research. So getting to even more fun part is goal 3 for me, I think, was breathing new life into these name lists, which is to surprise and delight. We've got new names. Eduardo Soprano is a new one. Julio Pantalone. I like that. Mud Blackguard. Wow. I don't have I don't know. I don't have more to say about these names. I love just generating names and reading them out loud. My first tip for adding new stuff to the name pool that I worked on is to create internal consistencies. For me, it was helpful to pick a repeating pattern or inspiration. In this case, you'll see that I added a lot of names that were themed on animals or foods, especially ones that just like had a good sound to them to me. And I felt like I kind of liken that to like Magic the Gathering cycle cards, where you can open up a booster pack and you don't need to know all 200-ish cards out of that booster. But like if you pick out a few that you know are thematically similar to other ones, that helps you compartmentalize them, right? Like it's less having like hundreds and hundreds of junk that's generated, and there is some cohesivity in the world. And especially if you have a game that's more heavy on fiction, on world building, the kinds of name patterns that you find that pop up in your world will tell you a lot more about the world, how parents name their kids, or how names get passed down over time. That's worth thinking about. With Blaseball in particular, it was very, very fun to create opportunities for happy coincidences, which is to say, Blaseball relies a lot on randomness. And by leaning into that randomness, even with a name generator, I was able to seed in fun things that like I had hoped would pan out, and some of them did. There is a character that got rolled with the name Zuri Shoelace, and I intentionally added the last name Shoelace as like a fun little thing. It's like a 1 in a million chance, right? But what are the chances that this would get pulled, and what are the chances that they would get pulled onto the team called the Charleston Shoe Thieves, who are shoe themed, right? So I added a lot of little bits in here and there of like, oh, I hope this gets pulled in a way that's relevant, or if it gets pulled in a way that's irrelevant, that's still really special. Like in a world where Zuri Shoelace gets put on the Hawaii Friday team, you'd still have a situation where fans of the Charleston Shoe Thieves were like, oh, I want that character. I don't care how good they are. They have a shoe themed name. How can we steal them? Right? Like that's engaging those players. That's driving more motivation for them to attach to certain characters and to follow them along the game. And Beef Night is a favorite example that I'm happy to talk about. A character got rolled with the name Beef Night, which is amusing on its own. Who doesn't like saying the word Beef Night? And again, Beef Night, I added the word beef in there as like a first name, as like a nickname that the actual sports players have, because it would be funny if they got rolled onto the Dallas Steaks, and they didn't. But because they didn't, we see people who are like, well, how do we get them on there? That'd be also fun. That'd be a fun thing to do. And then very quickly, Beef Night died. Lots of jokes ensued, of course. And even funnier, who replaced Beef Night but a character named Flan Prince, which I think is funnier than anything we could have written ourselves. It's the death of Beef Night replaced by Flan Prince, who has like a exactly similarly themed name for reasons that are also just similar, just again 1 in a million chance to have happened. It's amazing because this created a character that instantly has a backstory, that instantly has engagement, that instantly like people are interested in them and are already thinking about ways to explain the randomness. Like, how are they related? How was Flan Prince the liege of Beef Night? Like, did they have a relationship? That's all this fun stuff that can come out from seeding little fun things and fun little consistencies in a random name generator. And then, when it spits out 100 things, people are, of course, going to try to, connect the dots one way or another, right? So yeah, let's talk about testing and tuning. I'll try to get through these real quick. How do we decide on what success looks like? For me, it was just doing trial and error really quick and easy. You could write a program to like tag names and try to make sure they're balanced, but we just wanted to kind of just roll the numbers. For me, it was generating 10 in the spreadsheet over and over and over as I worked. I just read them out loud to myself, see if they feel good, see if they have a good mouthfeel, see if they feel balanced. And then once I decided I was done with adding names, I created a target ratio. That being, for every 10 names I wanted to achieve these goals, for every 10 names I wanted 1 or 2 of them to be absurd and comedic. I wanted 5 and 10 of them to sound explicitly non-white. I wanted 9 out of 10 to be fun to say, and maybe 1 is a tongue twister. In this 10 that I generated here, like the name Quinoa Pew is probably the more like complicated one to say, the one that's like difficult to say. Quinoa Pew, I don't know, but that's only 1, right? That's acceptable for me. If half of them were hard to pronounce, I would have to look at those in the list and maybe either remove them or change the proportions by adding other things. So it was a lot of trial and error to balance everything out. My last tip here for working on this name generator was to be open to feedback. Remember that this is a living document. Not only is your game a living document in which you're interacting with your audience and your fans, but like the names can and should change. Names are especially susceptible to negative associations that you didn't imagine, that you're probably going to get something wrong, and it's nothing personal. And sometimes it's beyond anybody's prediction, right? Like early in Blaseball, one of the names in the pool was the last name of a real life like famous football player. I forgot what it was already, but there's a famous football player who got generated onto a couple of teams. And then in 2020, that real life person said some pretty crappy things about the Black Lives Matter movement. And the Blaseball fans on that team said, it's, it brought that to our attention. It's like, this kind of sucks that like every time we cheer for our team, we're also cheering for like this guy whose namesake is in here. Can you change it? And we were like, actually, yeah, that's no trouble to us. It doesn't cost us anything. It's so much easier, and it's a win-win situation to bolster like the narrative of the world, to remove an element that reminds people of something really crappy, and just make it more flourish it with like something that everyone can enjoy better. And so in addition to that, strongly consider hiring a sensitivity consultant depending on your subject matter, especially if you're working on, like a fantasy game that takes a lot of inspiration from a real world culture. There are people out there who are more experts at it than you are, and it is worth listening to them, worth hiring them to hear what they have to say and hear what their feedback is, and make sure you're not making any missteps. And that is it. I think that's 30 minutes, but I'm happy to answer questions here.
Thank you. No, that was great.
Thank you.
Well done getting through it in time. I'll say if anyone wants to throw up a question real quick, we could probably do one, especially since this is the start of the social break. But yeah, no, it's excellent. It's fun to watch people experience the beef night flam prince moment in chat.
I love beef night.
It's so good. Because I think too, and it's like, it made the experience of working on the game fun as well, because like we were as surprised as anybody.
Right? It was all remote, obviously, but like, yeah, we're kind of in our separate departments. And I was so excited to work more on design stuff, and that we would have been able to if Blaseball went on. But there's always a future.
Yeah, well, it's actually, it's like you're a community designer, which is not a job title that's like super common in the industry, but
no, we made it
perfect. Yeah, but as you should, and I think more places should use it, because like the community team being tied into the design and closer back and forth was like crucial for things like this. Of you need to be listening to the community and how it's responding and how it's feeling about names, and factor that into the design process to make something compelling.
Yeah, 100%. It was so important for us, like, since so much of Blaseball relies on the people who are interacting with the game. It was also so important for us to like cultivate that in a healthy way, not just in a way that like people are not having fights, but also in a way that like people are engaging with the game in a way that makes them happy, and not just complaining all the time, as a lot of gamer communities and end up devolving into as they get bigger.
Yeah, totally. There's a question, I think I know the answer from Hillext of will you release the name list? Will it go to waste? Does it save somehow? I don't think we're allowed to release it.
I'll find a
right?
way. It's not, it's not technically my ownership. I'll find a way to do
Well,
something
that's
with
good.
it.
I know for a while people could tweet at you to get their own
Yes,
generated
actually, yeah.
things.
If you find my Twitter, you can at me and I'll generate a name just for you.
There we go. So you can at Elliot to get your very own Blaseball generated, bona fide, actual Blaseball generator, official name.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay, and then we should probably move on to the social space. But thank you so much, Elliot.
Thank you so
Fantastic talk.
much. So glad to be here.